everyone, and welcome to this installment of the Nufarm Virtual Learning Webinar Series. My name is Brandon Scott, Customer and Brand Marketing Manager for the Seed Treatment segment at Nufarm. And today, we're going to be learning more about Trunemco. Now, in previous webinars, you've probably heard us talk about the nematode problem in the United States and the $10 billion in lost yield annually, over $1 billion of that being attributed to soybean cyst nematode alone. Additionally, you've probably heard us talk about the need for a better solution due to issue escalation, solution resistance, and the limited number of choices. And finally, you've probably heard us talk about the patented technology in Trunemco that differentiates it from the other products that are available on the market, but also underpins that leading level of protection that Trunemco provides to soybeans, cotton, and corn, allowing those plants to thrive, delivering higher yield. You've heard us say all those things before. So for the sake of today's conversation, this webinar, we really want to take a step beyond that and share with you some data and some imagery that we were able to capture this previous growing season. Now, as we start to dive into the three separate crops, sharing data and imagery for soybeans, cotton, and corn, there's a few things I want to draw your attention to. So, of course, yield is the driving result that we're all looking for. And you're going to see time and time again that Trunemco is delivering higher yields than the competition. But there's some other really interesting metrics that I want to draw your attention to, and I want you to be looking for as we move through these slides. And that's going to be the leading level of protection that Trunemco provides when we talk about treating that seed with Trunemco and then watching the development of the root mass and the protection that Trunemco is providing as that plant develops and grows. The other piece is the impact that Trunemco has on the populations of plant parasitic nematodes in the soil across those different crops. So take a look at those few metrics. Again, it's the leading level of protection in nematode populations in the soil, specifically for plant parasitic nematodes. But of course, we're going to show you some great yield results as well. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about soybeans. So the first thing we're going to take a look at in soybeans is an image of soybean roots. Now, these were harvested from plants that were grown in pots with soil inoculated with soybean cyst nematode. And at about 75 days after planting, we harvested these roots and then have, as you can see, placed them in jars filled with water. And what you have here in these four vials are different treatments, clearly labeled. The check here on the leftmost, then followed by the Trunemco treated plant, and then competitor 1 and 2 respectively in vials 3 and 4. And what is readily apparent when you start to look at these vials is just how robust this root system is for the Trunemco treated plant. And when you start to look at how dark that is there towards the bottom of the vial here, that's really just how full and robust of a root system that plant's been able to grow due to the leading level of protection that Trunemco provides against soybean cyst nematode versus some of the more sparsely grown roots from competitors and the untreated check. Now, I should call out here that each one of these treatments received a base fungicide and insecticide treatment and then had their respective treatments of Trunemco or other competitive nematode control products placed on there. Really excited about the visual that we got here, but we wanted to see if Trunemco could do it again. So what we did is we replicated that trial. So again, we had soybean plants grown in pots with soil inoculated with soybean cyst nematode. And so I'll draw your attention to the right-hand side of the slide with the image. And so we've got the Trunemco treated plant here on the rightmost. This center is competitor 1, and then on the left is competitor 2. Now there were some interesting results with shoot weight an increased pod count on the Trunemco treated plant versus the competition. But in our short time together, I really want to draw your attention to the bottom left-hand corner of the screen to take a look at the bar chart. Now, what this is representing is a nematode count. So at the time where we harvested these plants and these roots, we also took a sample of the soil from the respective pots and did a nematode count of that soil. And what you can see here is this orange bar is representing the soil from the Trunemco treated plant. And what you can clearly see when you compare that to the competitor 1 and competitor 2 is the reduced number of nematodes that are in that soil. So not only is Trunemco protecting the plant and allowing it to grow a more robust root system, but it's actually reducing the number of nematodes in the soil, as clearly demonstrated here, helping to manage the populations of nematodes. As is often the case when we see something really exciting in a small plot setting, we want to see if that is being replicated in the field. And so what we're going to look at in the next couple of slides are results from a replicated field trial. Particularly this one, it was a SCN trial conducted by Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And so this photo we're taking a look at is 2 rows, one with Trunemco treated plants versus the competition. And what we can see here is how much greener and fuller and more vigorous those plants are that have been treated with Trunemco versus the competition, where we have some reduced stand and other things. I'll point out that this image was taken about 45 days after planting. So we've obviously taken this replicated field trial to yield, but there were some other key metrics that were captured as well. But let's start with yield and then move into the other ones. So to kick things off, yield here, we've got the orange bar, Trunemco, at just over 50, we call it 50.5 bushels. Taking a look at the gray bar is Pancho Votivo, somewhere in and around 47.5, and Olivo, the yellow bar, right there with 47.5 as well. So nearly 3 bushel yield advantage for Trunemco treated plants versus Pancho Votivo and Olivo treated soybeans. But what's underpinning that yield increase is, again, data that we saw in the earlier trials as well. So taking a look here, we've got SCNA count. It's very similar in the metric earlier, taking a look at nematodes. But again, what you're seeing here is the Trunemco treated plants in the soil taken from near those plants having a reduction in the amount of nematodes in the soil versus the competition. So not only providing that leading level of protection, but reducing the nematode population, which is delivering the higher yield. A couple of other key metrics I'll touch on briefly are stand count. Again, that's sort of an output of that leading level of protection, then the reduction in nematodes, and then phytotoxicity. This is just sort of a metric of the relative safety of the product versus the competition, and what you're seeing here is Trunemco having the least amount of phototoxicity, indicating plant safety. What we're going to take a look at now is the aggregation of field trial data and take a look at some waterfall charts. Now, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this particular slide to just acclimate everyone to what a waterfall chart is and what's being represented here. And then as we move forward, I'll move more quickly, just calling out the highlights from each one of the comparisons. In this specific instance, we're looking at Trunemco treated plants head-to-head versus Avicta treated soybean plants. I'll draw your attention first to the chart on the left, which is showing soybean yield. Now, each one of these bars indicates a field trial. And so N is 29, meaning there are 29 field trials or 29 head-to-head comparisons of Trunemco versus Avicta. Where the bar is going below the x-axis, that is where Avicta out-yielded Trunemco. On the inverse, where the bars are going above the x-axis, that is where Trunemco out-yielded Avicta. And what we see is that over those 29 field trials, Trunemco out-yielded Avicta on an average of 1.7 bushel to the acre with a win rate of almost 60% in those 29 trials. As we move to the chart on the right, this is taking a look at soybean root damage when we think about the amount of feeding or damage being done by nematodes. And so when we make these comparisons, the chart going above shows the relative increase in damage of Trunemco plants versus Invicta treated plants, and the bars going down showing the inverse of that. So here a negative number is desirable. So in other words, in summary, in head-to-head Trunemco versus Invicta, Trunemco treated roots had 21.7% less root damage in almost 70% of those 29 trials. All right, now moving forward, we're going to move through these a little bit more quickly. I'll just hit the highlights and we'll keep things going. Here, Trunemco versus Clariva in soybeans, a 2.4 bushel advantage for Trunemco when compared to Clariva, with a win rate of 56.4% over 39 different trials. And when we take a look at that decrease in root damage, Trunemco with treated roots had 21.5% less damage than the Clariva treated roots, with Trunemco winning that comparison 78.1% of the time over 32 trials where we collected that information. Okay, now we're going to move in to cotton. Similar to the soybean trial that we showed earlier, these are cotton plants grown in pots. This time the soil was inoculated with root knot nematode. And again, I'll draw your attention to, we've got, again, sort of a similar setup here. Check on the left, Trunemco number 2, and competitors 1 and 2 in plants 3 and 4 respectively. What I want to draw your attention to is if you look at that Trunemco treated plant, what you can clearly see is just how full and robust that cotton plant is, how nice, dark, and green the foliage is when compared to the check in competitors 1 and 2 in this particular trial. Now, again, in this trial, similar to that with the soybeans, we took some other quantitative metrics. But what I want to draw your attention to is the nematode counts here on the left. So once again, Trunemco being the orange bar compared to competitor 1 and 2, you can, and the check, you can clearly see that Trunemco reducing the number of nematodes in the soil versus the competition. And this is what's, again, leading to those higher yields. Similar to soybeans, we rolling up that data, aggregating that, and comparing, making head-to-head comparisons with some of the leading competitions. In this particular instance, this is Trunemco versus Invicta in cotton. And again, we have cotton yield on the left, and it's a reduction in cotton root damage on the right. So as we take a look here in the chart on the left, 79.3 pound advantage for Trunemco treated plants on average versus Invicta treated cotton plants. Trunemco winning those competitions 58.8% of the time, and that's being delivered by the reduction in root damage. Trunemco having 20.7% less root damage than Invicta treated plants with a win rate of 56.7% of the time. The next one, we're showing Trunemco versus Pancho Votivo again on cotton, with Trunemco having an average yield advantage of 54.5 pounds versus Pancho Votivo with a win rate of almost 65%. When we take a look at cotton root damage, Trunemco protecting those plants with 17.4% less damage than the Pancho Votivo treated plants with a win rate of 72.4%. And finally, let's move into corn. Taking a look at the aggregation of data here as well. Again, Trunemco versus Invicta, this time in corn. On the left, we've got 4.4 bushel advantage for Trunemco treated plants versus Invicta with a win rate of almost 61% of the time. Trunemco outperforming Invicta on an average of 4.4 bushels to the acre. And as we take a look at corn root damage, Trunemco being consistent, delivering that leading level of protection with 24.7% less damage to those roots versus an Invicta treated corn plant with a win rate of 68% of the time. And then finally, wrapping things up against the market leader, Pancho Votivo. Trunemco outperforming Pancho Votivo by an average of 7 bushels to the acre with a win rate of 61% in 44 replicated trials. And when we take a look at the corn root damage, a reduction in root damage of 12%, almost 62% of the time. Now, one of the final things that I want to touch on in today's webinar is a question that I've gotten quite a bit over the past 9 months. And that is where folks have essentially came up to us and said, look, guys, Trunemco on corn, that's great, but as we all know, you're essentially getting a treatment as you purchase that seed from your seed company. The question is, can you overtreat Trunemco on the corn that you're receiving from your seed company? And the answer is yes. Now, we've got, albeit a relatively low number of trials, but the data we've seen is really promising, indicating a yield benefit of overtreating corn with Trunemco. And what we'll show here is we had a few trials where we were able to take a look at an untreated check with a base fungicide insecticide treatment, and then had one treatment with Trunemco only versus Pancho Votivo. You can see the difference here being a couple of bushels. And however, if we take a look at the Pancho Votivo plus Trunemco treatment, you're seeing almost an 8-bushel yield advantage over the Pancho Votivo only treatment, going from 204 to almost 212. So, in other words, I really just want to share with folks that there is an opportunity and a value to overtreating your Pancho Votivo treated seed with Trunemco. And with that, I want to thank everyone for their time. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about Trunemco, and I hope you have a great year.